Dinosaurs were perhaps fortunate. After all, there are few ancient creatures that, tens of millions of years after their disappearance, still have a group of hairless apes continuing to spread their legend. But dinosaurs were also perhaps the most unfortunate ancient creatures, because their extinction truly encountered the most unlucky, black swan, event in history. To be honest, the period 66 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous, was a time of escalating and intense development since the emergence of animals. Dinosaurs, including enantiornithines and perhaps mosasaurs, were generally in an evolutionary ascendant period. At least at that time, there really weren't any particularly strong competitors. As a result, while they were eating hot pot and singing songs, metaphor for enjoying life, they were suddenly hit by a meteorite. If that runaway asteroid had passed by a few days earlier or later, it wouldn't have hit Earth at all. Even if it had arrived just a few minutes earlier or later, this asteroid would have fallen into the vast deep ocean, not causing a major disaster. But this unlucky object happened to strike at that exact moment. On the rotating Earth, it precisely and accurately hit that small piece of land and shallow sea between two vast oceans. Okay, it hit. This actually wouldn't have caused such a huge commotion. But the problem is, the place where it made a hard landing was not an ordinary shallow sea. It was the feng shui treasure land of the Yucatan Peninsula, which happened to store massive amounts of gypsum. As a result, a large amount of sulfur dioxide was produced during the impact. This sulfur dioxide, unlike carbon dioxide, causes a hothouse effect. This refers to the icehouse effect and a rapid drop in global temperature. And it would have been fine if it were just the gypsum deposits. But the Yucatan Peninsula also happened to be one of the few areas globally at that time with rich fossil fuel reserves. As a result, the incomplete combustion triggered by the impact produced 300 million tons of black carbon. And that wasn't all. Near the Yucatan Peninsula, there also happened to be thousands of miles of continuous forests. These too were incinerated and lofted into the atmosphere by the shockwave and high temperatures. Consequently, this smoke and dust, combined with the massive amount of sulfur dioxide, continuously obscured the sky for years. Oh, wow. Well, today, let's assume that 66 million years ago, the timeline shifted ever so slightly. A dazzling fireball streaked across the sky, and then the world returned to tranquility. At this time, warm spring breezes wafted across the recently fragmented supercontinent of Pangaea. Dense forests even grew within the Arctic and Antarctic circles. However, beneath the familiar atmosphere, undercurrents were stirring. And these undercurrents carried the rich fragrance of flowers. Yes, starting from about 125 million years ago, flowering plants began to bloom everywhere. This was followed by a massive reshuffle, starting with insects. Beneath the feet of those towering dinosaurs, quiet revolutions were still occurring. In fact, by 66 million years ago, the dominant forces that shaped our current world, mammals, birds, butterflies, ants, lizards, and so on, were already stirring. This included the earliest primates, like Purgatorius, which had already stepped onto the historical stage. Evolution seemed inevitable, though this time the resistance would be greater. Since various titanosaurs and giant rhinoceratoids were still roaming South America and Africa, it's estimated that large-bodied mammals like elephants and ground sloths, which also went the route of massive size, wouldn't have been able to rise so quickly. In my opinion, these giant herbivorous animals would most likely be the first to be wiped out by the tide of the times. This is because the trend of flowering plants replacing gymnosperms and ferns was already irreversible. Flowering plants not only have significantly different toxic compounds in their leaves compared to traditional gymnosperms, but generally their leaves are also tougher. Traditional herbivorous dinosaurs might not have been able to handle them. In fact, throughout history, it's generally been ironclad hunters, flowing plant eaters. Not to mention major events like the rise of simplified plants. Even minor technical adjustments in plant evolution could wipe out a large number of previously dominant herbivorous animals, don't you agree? Consider Edmontosaurus, Gallimimus, Pelorosaurus, Lystrosaurus, Homalocephal, Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, Iguanodon, Amphicelias, Triceratops, Giraffatitan. However, dinosaurs, after all, had a vast family and enterprise. Even if the herbivorous dinosaurs were to suffer greatly, they wouldn't be completely wiped out. Especially considering the hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, which were clearly not destined for extinction during the Cretaceous period. Even if their terrestrial herbivorous ecological niche was entirely wiped out, they wouldn't have been pushed to the brink of extinction. In fact, the rise of flowering plants might have even unlocked new evolutionary paths for these old birds. Regardless of whether the large meteorite struck or not, Earth's plate tectonics wouldn't have changed significantly. The supercontinent Pangaea would have continued to break apart, creating the fragmented landmasses and vast oceans we see today. Moreover, starting from the mid to late Cretaceous, flowering plants developed a new tech tree, the ability to live in seawater. Many seagrasses, for instance, evolved the capacity to breathe and reproduce underwater. Consequently, numerous shallow marine areas developed extensive underwater grasslands. Hadrosaurs, already fond of humid environments, might have seamlessly transitioned to a diving, herbivorous lifestyle. Consider creatures like Parasaurolophus, their hollow crests, naturally connected to their respiratory tracts, could have, with further evolution, become natural snorkels, allowing them to graze on seagrass without needing to surface for air. Going even further, a complete transformation into marine animals isn't out of the question, as the hadrosaur family did include species well adapted for swimming. With a slight modification to their broad, flattened tails, they could have become the herbivorous ichthyosaurs of their time. If this were the case, perhaps manatees and dugongs would never have existed. Beyond this, many woody plants evolved a viviparous reproductive strategy. Instead of seeds falling to the ground immediately, they'd develop into sizable plantlets directly on the parent plant before taking root. This significantly boosted their reproductive success rate, aiding their colonization of intertidal zones. Mangroves are a prime example. Their intricate root systems and branches in shallow coastal areas provide vital shelter for spawning fish, shrimp, and crabs, as well as crucial roosting sites for birds. This, remarkably, opened up entirely new opportunities for ankylosaurs. What does this have to do with them, you ask? Well, in northeast China, a small ankylosaur species was discovered that was specifically adapted for diving and eating fish. Take the peculiar Liaoningsaurus. If it had just held on for another 10 or 20 million years, it might have been able to snatch some ecological niches from today's turtles and tortoises. Expanding this thought even further, as flowering plants began to proliferate and expand during the Cretaceous, leading to a massive invasion by ants. Perhaps even ankylosaurs could have seized this opportunity. Given that ankylosaur skeletons hadn't specialized for lightness like those of enantiornithine birds, it's theoretically possible they could have evolved a slender, extendable tongue, similar to a pangolin's, to delve into ant nests and feast. If the true dragon clan, dinosaurs, had personally entered this niche, then the copycat dragons, like pigs and pangolins, wouldn't have stood a chance. Don't think that's the end of it. The good times for dinosaurs were still to come. Around 55.5 million years ago, Earth was due to experience a period of global warming, the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, to be precise. Suddenly, Earth seemed to revert to a carboniferous-like rainforest world. Consequently, many dinosaurs adapted to forest life would have advanced rapidly, spreading across the globe. For example, the small and adorable Scansoriopterigidae, scansorial birds. Their lifestyle would likely have been somewhere between that of an ii and a squirrel in our world. Within this family of scansorial birds, there even appeared odd forms like Yichi and Ambipteryx. You might say, but Scansoriopterigidae lived over 100 million years ago, from the Jurassic to the early Cretaceous, just evolving for fun and dying out within a few tens of millions of years. Ah, but you can't say that. Moreover, even if the Scansoriopterigidae had truly gone extinct and were lying neatly in the coffin, there would still be a whole host of other forest-adapted dinos, like Deinonychus, Troodontidae, Aviali, Compsognathidae, and even early birds, to name a few. Which of them couldn't thrive in the forest canopy? Speaking of birds, the birds we are familiar with today are, at best, the descendants of just a few water birds and ground-dwelling fowl from the diverse avian family of the Cretaceous period. During the Cretaceous, the most undoubtedly flourishing lineage of birds was the enantiorniths, which were quite specialized for forest life. Their wings still retained claws, making them very suitable for climbing trees. I imagine they would have thrived in that Stone Age rainforest world. Presumably, in that alternate world, the ancestors of our modern birds might not have had much opportunity to advance. I know many of you might be impatient, thinking, ting ting, why is it still a dinosaur world? What about us, bulk rodents? Save us. Objectively speaking. In fact, ever since the Jurassic period, we mammals had already secured an unshakable fundamental niche, the night. You see, the dragon lineage, dinosaurs, primarily focused on visual perception. They were kings of the day. But we mammals focused on the remaining senses, smell, hearing, and touch. For this, mammals developed superior noses, external ears, ossicles, and whiskers. By the time of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, PETM, the Cenozoic had developed these skill trees to an almost magical degree, even inventing the unreasonable, dark technology of echolocation. So, I believe that mammals like bats and shrews would have risen as usual. As for us primates, particularly monkeys, we should also be largely fine. Early primates, like lemurs, were mostly nocturnal, which would have kept them out of the direct sight of diurnal dinosaurs. In fact, even today, our closest primate relatives, tree shrews and bush babies, along with some of you watching this video, still retain the nocturnal habits of our Cretaceous ancestors. I'd even go so far as to say that the continued existence of dinosaurs might have slightly accelerated the rise of great apes. After all, the reason we primates managed to survive competition with squirrels and other canopy-dwelling animals was by holding a big fire, and I mean that literally. For instance, Aegyptopithecus, which lived over 30 million years ago, reached a size of 6 to 7 kilograms, making it a behemoth among canopy creatures of its time. This helped it survive. However, as the saying goes, the tree that can carry a monkey can also let it fall. Therefore, our monkeyism had to constantly reinforce functions like bipedal grasping, upright posture, and flexible upper limb grasping. This allowed us to distribute our weight across as many branches as possible, subtly laying the foundational physical groundwork for humanity's later emergence. In that alternate timeline, while trying to compete with dinosaurs in terms of size sounds like a death wish, it's a different story specifically within the tree canopy. After all, there don't seem to be many very large dinosaurs that could also climb trees. Not only that, but we primates also have a traditional ability to fight evil dragons. The biggest threats to primates in trees are primarily various birds of prey and snakes. But if primates didn't want to be high-end food, they had to become high-end talent. Consequently, primate social groups grew larger and larger, and intelligence increased in layers. So, in a universe where dinosaurs survived, it's quite plausible that primate social groups would grow ever larger, and their intelligence would rapidly increase. It would be entirely understandable for primates to fiercely power level their way through the newbie village of evolution. Even if they missed this particular evolutionary train, it wouldn't matter much. Because soon after, the timeline would begin to reset automatically. And the first to disrupt things would be an unnoticed player. A plant, specifically a type of fern. It's called Azolla. This plant has no other special talents, except for one incredibly powerful skill, rapid growth. It's truly a one-trick pony, but a devastatingly effective one. Around 49 million years ago, Azolla suddenly bloomed in the Arctic Ocean region. During that period, continental drift had transformed the Arctic Ocean into an almost entirely enclosed inland sea. The extremely poor water circulation led to severe oxygen depletion on the seabed. Consequently, the Azolla on the surface of the Arctic Ocean grew rapidly and died just as quickly. Their bodies layered one on top of another, falling to the Arctic seabed where they could not decompose. Thus, the carbon dioxide they had fixed during their short lives was sealed away in the seafloor. As a result, in approximately 800,000 years, about half of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at that time was removed. This caused the steadily rising global temperatures to suddenly hit a turning point. This event is historically known as the Azolla event. But it didn't stop there. Soon after, on the southern edge of the Asian continent, the Indian subcontinent collided head-on. This led to the dramatic uplift of the Himalayan mountain range and the Tibetan plateau. With this, massive amounts of silicate minerals were brought to the surface. Rocks undergoing weathering processes absorb large quantities of carbon dioxide. This process effectively scrubbed the atmosphere of carbon dioxide. Ultimately, around 33.9 million years ago, global temperatures experienced a cliff edge drop. Forests collapsed everywhere, and sea levels plummeted. This event is historically known as the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event, or Grande Coupure. From this point on, Earth bid farewell to a long, warm period that had lasted for nearly 200 million years. And so, Earth entered the Cenozoic icehouse period, which continues to this day. It's not hard to imagine that the dinosaurs, which were originally extremely dependent on forest environments, suffered heavy losses, much like the amblypods and various archaic ungulates in our timeline. Conversely, animals highly adapted to open plains, like horses and carnivorous mammals, would still rise powerfully in that alternate timeline. However, the Eocene-Oligocene extinction event was, after all, only a minor extinction event. It wouldn't have led to the complete eradication of dinosaurs. And what might delight some of you is that large, bipedal carnivorous dinosaurs, represented by the tyrannosaurs, might even have experienced a resurgence. Though their size would likely be somewhat diminished. After all, if you're such a massive target on open ground, and the prey aren't just tiny shrimp, it's a different game. Furthermore, after the previous operations by dinosaurs, there probably wouldn't be as many large prey animals on the vast plains to match their enormous size. On the other hand, medium to small-sized carnivorous dinosaurs might have secured a place at the top of the food chain, thanks to their dragon's breath. After all, in our timeline, even the Furusarhacids, a low-spec version of dinosaurs, dominated the South American continent for over 30 million years. Beyond that, some bipedal dinosaurs, such as the descendants of troodontids, if they could have transitioned in time to become omnivores or even herbivores, probably wouldn't have fared too badly. At the very least, they'd likely have been more successful than ostriches and rheas in our timeline. If these dinosaurs were truly hard-fated, enough to dodge the first day of the month, they would have surprisingly also dodged the junior high, senior high, and graduate school exams. Yes, I'm talking about the subsequent mid-Miocene extinction event around 10 million years ago, and the carbon dioxide starvation event about 5 million years ago. If they also weren't, first sight killed, by a certain hairless ape emerging from Africa, then in that alternate timeline, the modern era would be one where humans and multiple species of dinosaurs coexist. I believe that given the diversity of dinosaurs, they wouldn't have been completely wiped out, no matter what. Although they would have endured these hardships, most of the surviving dinosaurs would likely exist as living fossils. However, some might still manage to continue developing and thriving in this era, which wasn't originally theirs, even becoming an indispensable part of human life. Such a world sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? In that world, the shamans of the Shang dynasty might communicate with their ancestors using ankylosaur scutes and plastrons. Li Bai, the Tang dynasty poet, might hear the calls of hadrosaurs echoing from the riverbanks while composing his poems. Spoiled young nobles might walk around with enantiorniths that have winged claws. Young people might become utterly obsessed with small compsognathids like Sinornithosaurus. I wonder if, in that alternate timeline, there would also be a Ghost Valley scholar, fantasizing about a world where dinosaurs went extinct. But no, even in our own timeline, as long as humanity remains fascinated by dinosaurs, dinosaurs will never truly leave us. I'll see you next time.